Hazel Ashfield pressed her hand over her little brother's mouth as their father's boots struck the porch steps one by one. She could count them in the dark. 4 steps, 3, 2, 1. She was 20 years old. She had buried a woman who was not her blood, but had called her daughter anyway. She had raised Danny since before he could walk. She had kept this house standing through drought and debt and a man who drank his grief until it curdled into cruelty. And tonight she had heard the truth, not from her father, not from anyone who loved her. She had heard it through a wall in the voice of a man she had never trusted, spoken like a business arrangement. Her own father had sold her to Victor Crane, the man who owned every dark thing in Sweetwater Flats. But the frontier has a long memory, and sometimes the person who comes to save you is the last person on earth you should trust. If this story moves something inside you, please subscribe and follow Hazel's journey to the very end. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story can travel. He paid $350 for a girl. His enemy's crimes created then learned who she really was. Sweetwater Flats, New Mexico territory, October 1879. The town was named for the spring that had run dry 11 years ago. That was the kind of place it was, named for something it no longer had. The heat had broken a month ago, but the cold that replaced it was the wrong kind, thin and mean, not the honest cold of mountains. It came off the flats like a blade drawn slow across the skin. The cottonwoods along the wash had gone yellow and brittle. Everything that wasn't dying was waiting to. Hazel Ashfield stood at the kitchen window and watched the last light leave the sky. She was tall for a woman with dark red hair she kept pinned tight at the base of her neck, and gray eyes that people sometimes mistook for blue until they got close enough to see that there was nothing soft in them. She had the hands of someone who had worked since she was old enough to hold a broom. Calloused palms, a small scar along the right thumb from the summer she was 12 and tried to fix the plow herself because Gerald wouldn't get up off the porch. Gerald, she heard him now, his boots on the steps outside. 4, 3, 2, 1. The door swung open. Gerald Ashfield was 54 years old and looked 70. He had been a broad man, once the kind of man who filled a doorway. Life had hollowed him out. His cheeks had sunk. His shoulders curved inward as if trying to protect something that was already gone. He still had his eyes pale brown, restless, always calculating, even when the rest of him pretended not to care. He was sober tonight. That was the first thing Hazel noticed. The second thing was that he wouldn't look at her. "Supper ready," he said to the wall. "It's on the stove." He moved to the table and sat down heavily. She set the plate in front of him, beans, salt pork, cornbread, and went back to the window. She didn't sit. She hadn't sat at the same table as Gerald in 3 years, not since the night he had told her that everything bad that had ever happened to this family had started the day he brought her home. He hadn't been wrong exactly. Things had gotten worse after she arrived, but he had the cause and the effect reversed, and she had been 20 years too young to explain the difference. "Danny's asleep," Gerald asked. "An hour ago." A pause, the sound of a fork scraping against tin. "Victor Crane's coming by in the morning," Gerald said. His voice was flat, practiced. Hazel turned from the window. Crane, the name moved through her like cold water. Victor Crane owned the Red Eagle Saloon, the livery stable, and half the mortgages in Sweetwater Flats. He was not a violent man. That was what made him dangerous. He didn't need to be. He had other people for that. "What does he want?" she asked. "Business." Gerald's fork stopped moving. "Nothing you need to worry about." She looked at him for a long moment. He still wouldn't meet her eyes. "All right," she said. She went to bed. She didn't sleep. The house was small, 4 rooms, thin walls. She had grown up learning to hear through them. She lay in the dark with Danny's warm weight beside her, listening to the sounds of the night, and she heard Gerald's chair scrape back from the table. She heard him go to the parlor. She heard the clink of a glass. So he wasn't entirely sober after all. And then an hour before midnight, she heard the horse. One horse, moving quiet, deliberate, like someone who didn't want to be heard but knew they would be anyway. Hazel sat up. Danny shifted beside her and settled back into sleep. She moved to the window and looked out through the gap in the curtain. A man sat on a gray horse at the edge of the yard. Not large, not small, dressed dark. The moonlight caught the silver on his vest buttons, the kind of silver a successful man wore to remind you of his success. "Victor Crane." Hazel's hand found the curtain fabric and held it. She couldn't hear the words at first, just the low murmur of men's voices. Gerald's higher and faster, Crane's even as still water. She eased the window open half an inch. "Can't keep putting this off, Gerald. I've been patient." I know that. I just need more time. You've had 3 years. A pause. The debt is what it is. The interest is what it is. I've been more than fair. I'll find another way. There is no other way. Crane's voice didn't harden. It stayed exactly the same, which was somehow worse. You know what I'm offering? It's a clean arrangement. Better than she'd find anywhere else out here. She's not what you think. She's difficult. She won't. I'm not asking her. I'm asking you. Silence. The horse shifted its weight. Crane reached down and adjusted his reins with the unhurried patience of a man who already knew how this conversation ended. She knows things, Gerald said finally. His voice had dropped so low she almost missed it. About the accounts, about what Harrison did before he died, about me. If she talks, then we make sure she doesn't talk. Crane's voice was gentle, almost kind. Come now, she's a pretty girl. She'll land on her feet. She'll hate me. She already does. Another silence, longer. The papers are in my saddlebag, Crane said. I'll leave them on the fence post. Sign them before morning. The horse moved. Crane rode out of the yard without looking back, unhurried as a man leaving church. Hazel stood at the window until her legs started to shake. Then she sat down on the edge of the bed and pressed both hands flat against her thighs and breathed. She knew what papers meant. She had seen what happened to the women at the Red Eagle. She had watched them come to town young and leave old or not leave at all. She knew what fetch a good price meant. She had known somewhere in the back of her mind that this was always where this road was heading. The debts, the drink, the way Gerald looked at her sometimes, with something that was equal parts love and terror. But hearing it spoken aloud in the dry, flat voice of a man doing arithmetic was different. She sat with it for 2 full minutes. Then she stood up, drawer under the window, and found the drawer under the window, and found the small knife she used for peeling potatoes. She tucked it into her boot. She took the canteen from the hook by the door and filled it at the pump without letting it splash. From beneath the loose board under her cot, the one Gerald had never found because he had never once looked for anything, she took the only thing of value she owned. A small silver locket on a thin chain. Inside, a photograph of a woman she had never met. Dark hair, quiet eyes, a handwriting on the back that said simply, "For my girl, whenever she's ready." Hazel had found it tucked into the hem of her dress the day Gerald brought her home. She had been 4 years old. She had kept it every day of the 16 years since. She pressed it against her lips. Then she went to Danny. He was 8 years old and slept like the dead, arms out, mouth open, completely trusting. He had their mother's eyes, people always said, by which they meant the woman who had raised them both, Margaret Ashfield, dead of fever 2 winters ago. He had Margaret's gentleness and Gerald's stubbornness and some third thing that was entirely his own, a way of seeing the world as essentially worth paying attention to, even the hard parts. Hazel couldn't leave him. She had thought about it. In the cold, logical part of her mind that she developed out of necessity, she had calculated whether it was possible to get to Albuquerque, find work, send money back. She had run the numbers twice. She couldn't leave him. If she vanished, Gerald would drink himself to death within the year, and Danny would have no one. She woke him gently, one hand over his mouth before his eyes opened. His body went still. Instantly, he had learned that too, the way children do when they grow up in houses full of uncertain weather. "We're going," she whispered. "Right now. Quiet." He nodded. He was dressed and had his shoes on in the time it took her to write the note she tucked under Gerald's empty whiskey glass on the kitchen table. "I heard everything. Don't look for us." She thought about writing more. She thought about the 312 nights she had cooked his supper. The one time she was 12 and sick with fever, and she woke up at 3 in the morning to find him sitting in the chair beside her bed, his big hands clasped together, and she had pretended to still be asleep because she didn't know what to do with the sight of a man like that looking afraid. She left the note as it was. They slipped out the back door and into the dark. The moon was 3/4 full and cold. Their breath made small white clouds. Hazel walked fast, her hand wrapped around Danny's wrist, keeping to the shadow of the cottonwoods that lined the wash. The road to the east was 2 miles. From there, it was 30 miles to the next town. 30 miles in the dark with an 8-year-old boy and no horse. She walked faster. They made it almost a mile and a half. The men came out of the dark the way coyotes did, silent, until they were already on you. 3 of them. She recognized the biggest one, Luther, who ran the door at the Red Eagle, and had the flat, cheerful eyes of someone who enjoyed his work. "Evening, Miss Ashfield." He touched the brim of his hat with one finger, almost polite. "Mr. Crane sends his regards. Says you ought to come back to town with us before this gets uncomfortable." Hazel put herself between Luther and Danny without thinking. We're not going anywhere with you. Now that's a shame. Luther shook his head slowly. He wasn't a man who got angry. That was the thing about Crane's people. They took the emotion out of it. It was just logistics. Mr. Crane was hoping this could be friendly. There's nothing friendly about this. Miss Ashfield. Luther's voice dropped to something almost gentle. Look at this boy here. Nice kid. Doesn't need to be part of whatever this becomes. You come along quiet, he goes home safe. Simple arithmetic. Hazel felt Danny's hand find the back of her coat and grip it. She had the knife. She had her hands. She had nothing else. She ran anyway. She made it 6 steps before the second man caught her arm and spun her around. She went for his face with the knife and caught him across the cheek, not deep, but enough to make him yelp. The third man grabbed her from behind. Danny screamed her name. Someone wrenched the knife away. Easy. Luther stepped up close. He wasn't angry. He was faintly disappointed the way a man gets when a problem takes longer than it should. You done? You, she spat at him. He grabbed her wrists and bound them. The boy comes too, he said over his shoulder. Mr. Crane will sort it out in the morning. They marched them back to Sweetwater Flats in the cold moonlight. Hazel didn't look at Danny. She kept her eyes forward and thought very carefully about breathing. The Red Eagle was still lit when they arrived. Piano music floated out through the doors, something bright and hollow that sounded like someone performing happiness rather than feeling it. Crane was waiting in his office. He was not what people expected when they imagined a villain. He was 50 years old, slim with a neatly trimmed gray beard and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He looked like a banker or a pastor or a doctor, someone accustomed to other people's crises and grateful to be useful. He stood up when they came in. Miss Ashfield. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Please sit. No. Suit yourself? He sat back down. His office was orderly ledgers, correspondence, a glass of water beside his pen. No liquor. He never drank. I'm sorry this happened the way it did. Your father should have spoken to you directly. That was his failing. He sold me, Hazel said. Her voice was flat. She was proud of how flat it was. The word sold implies a property transaction, which isn't quite accurate under current. He sold me. Crane looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded a small concession. Yes, he did. For a debt owed in good faith over 3 years, which he has shown no capacity to repay by any other means. And Danny, the boy goes home. This isn't about the boy. If I don't cooperate, drinks the way Gerald drinks is an unreliable guardian. There are people in this territory who would take a child like Daniel in, give him work and education of sorts. It would be a shame for things to go that direction. He meant it. That was the part that reached through her chest and grabbed something. Take her to the back room, Crane said to Luther. Make her comfortable. I'll speak with Mr. Ashfield in the morning. The back room was a storeroom, locked from the outside, a single window, too small to crawl through a blanket folded on a cot. There was a candle and a chamber pot, and nothing else. Luther untied her wrists and locked the door without a word. Hazel sat on the cot and held her own hands in her lap. She could hear the piano. She sat with her back straight and her hands still, and she did something she had not done since the night Margaret Ashfield died. She prayed. Not for rescue. She had long since given up on that particular request. She prayed for clarity. She prayed to understand what she was supposed to do next in a world where the people who were supposed to protect you were the first ones to let you down. The candle burned down. She slept without meaning to, sitting up and woke when the light changed to gray. Outside, she could hear the town beginning its day. A horse, a cart, someone calling a name. She pressed her back against the wall, pulled her knees up, and waited. She thought about Danny. She thought about the locket which Luther had not thought to take from inside her boot. She thought about the woman in the photograph. The woman with quiet eyes and the handwriting that said, "For my girl, whenever she's ready." She had never been ready. She wasn't sure what that was supposed to feel like. She was still sitting like that, back straight, knees up, eyes open, when she heard the sound of a cattle drive. She heard it before she understood what it was. A low rumble building from the east. The sound of 300 animals and a dozen men moving across dry ground. It built slowly the way thunder builds until she could feel it through the floor of the storeroom. She got up and stood on the cot and pressed her eye to the gap at the top of the high window. Longhorns. A solid moving river of them horns catching the morning light. Cowboys working the flanks on horseback. At the front, slightly apart from the rest, a single rider on a dark roan. He sat his horse the way men sit a horse. When they've done it so long, they've stopped thinking about it, easy in the saddle hat, pulled low, one hand on the reins and the other resting on his thigh. He was watching the town as he rode into it, not curious the way a traveler watches, reading it, the way a man reads a place for threats before he decides how to move through it. Hazel couldn't see his face. She stepped down off the cot. She had no reason to think anything was about to change. Cattle drives passed through Sweetwater Flats 3 times a year. Cowboys spent money, caused trouble, moved on. The world went on the way it had always gone. She sat back down and laced her fingers together and tried to think clearly about her options. Outside, the cattle lowed and the boots of men struck the boardwalk, and the piano in the main room started up again, though it was barely 8 in the morning. She heard Crane's voice through the wall, something about hospitality, about bringing the trail boss around, something about refreshments and a fair price for supplies. She heard another voice respond, lower, slower, unimpressed. She couldn't make out the words. She stood up again and pressed her ear against the wall. The second voice said, I don't want your refreshments. I want to know what you're keeping in your back room. Silence. I beg your pardon, Crane said. I can hear a woman's heartbeat through walls, the voice said. That's a lie, but I can hear when a room's too quiet for a storage room on a morning like this. What are you keeping back there? More silence. Business arrangements, Crane said carefully. Nothing that concerns a trail boss passing through. Everything concerns me that happens in a town where my men are spending money. A pause. The young woman is here of her own volition. I'd like to hear that from her. Another silence, longer. Then footsteps, one set, deliberate, coming toward the back room. The lock rattled. The door opened. He was tall, lean rather than broad, the kind of body made by years of outdoor work rather than any intention. His face was sharp-featured, weathered with a breed that hadn't seen a razor in 3 or 4 days. Gray eyes, the kind that look silver in certain light. He was 35, maybe. Old enough to have given up on some things. Young enough for it to still show on him. He looked at her. She looked at him. Are you here by choice? He said. No. Do you have anywhere to go? My brother is somewhere in this town. He's 8 years old. The man looked at her for another moment. Something moved across his face, not pity, which she would have hated. Something that looked more like recognition. My name is Rafe Merritt, he said. I'm the trail boss on this outfit. Do you want to get out of here? I want my brother first. Then we'll get him. He stepped back from the door, giving her room. She stood up and walked past him without looking at his hands to check for weapons, without calculating their angles. It was a foolish thing to do. She did it anyway. Crane was standing behind his desk with the stillness of a man deciding how far he was willing to go. Mr. Merritt, he said, this is not your business. I'm making it mine. Rafe's voice was even. He didn't put his hand on his gun. He didn't need to. The threat was architectural, built into the way he occupied space. You'll tell me what you're owed, and I'll pay it. The arrangement is not about money. Everything in an office like this is about money. Rafe reached into his vest and pulled out a leather pouch. He set it on Crane's desk without counting it. That's $400. That's more than you're owed, and more than you'll make off her in a year. Take it and be done. Crane looked at the pouch. His expression was unreadable. And if I refuse, then I walk out of here with her anyway, and tomorrow morning there are a dozen cowboys in this town with nothing to do except tell everyone they meet about the kind of establishment you run. Rafe's voice didn't change. My men talk. Trail towns talk. You can have $400 and your reputation, or you can have neither. The silence stretched. Then Crane picked up the pouch. The boy is in the kitchen, he said. Luther will take you. Hazel found Danny sitting at the long table in the kitchen eating biscuits and looking at everything with the careful attention of a child memorizing details for later. He looked up when she came in, and his face did the thing it always did, a quick, bright relief that he immediately tried to hide because he was 8 and wanted to seem older. She didn't let him hide it. She crossed the room in 4 steps and pulled him against her and held on. I was okay, he said into her shoulder. I know you were. I had 3 biscuits. Good. We're leaving. She felt him nod. He pulled back and looked up at the man standing in the doorway. Who's that? Hazel looked at Rafe Merritt. She had not thanked him. She was not sure she intended to. Not yet not until she understood what she was stepping into. He says he's helping us, she said. Danny studied Rafe with the frank assessment of childhood. You have a gun. I do, Rafe said. Do you know how to use it? Well enough. Danny looked at Hazel. She could see him running the calculation threat or resource. What does my sister think? He had learned to read her before he could read words. Okay, Danny said and slid off the bench. They stepped out of the Red Eagle into the flat October morning. The cattle drive had settled into a loose camp at the edge of town. Animals at the water trough, men gathered around a cook fire. An older cowboy with a gray beard and a pronounced limp detached himself from the group and came toward them. "Holt," Rafe said, "we're moving out early." Holt looked at Hazel, looked at Danny, looked at Rafe with an expression that communicated volumes without a single word spoken. "Course we are," he said. "The woman and the boy ride with us to the crossroads. After that," Rafe glanced at Hazel. "After that is their decision." "You don't have to do this," Hazel said. It came out sounding like an accusation, which was not what she meant. Or maybe it was. She wasn't sure yet. "I know I don't." "Then why are you?" Rafe was quiet for a moment. He looked past her at the town, the Red Eagle, with its painted sign, the saloon girls already beginning their morning routines behind the upstairs windows, the careful ordered smallness of a place that had learned to look the other way. "Because no one did it for someone I couldn't save," he said finally. He walked toward the horses before she could respond. Holt appeared at her elbow. He had kind eyes and a face like a man who had seen most things and made peace with them. "He's not what he looks like," Holt said quietly. "What does he look like?" "Hard." Holt considered this. "He is hard, but that ain't all he is." He tipped his hat to Danny. "Morning, son. You like horses?" "Yes, sir," Danny said immediately. "Good. You can ride up front with me and not bother the boss while he's thinking." "He thinks a lot. More than's good for him." Danny looked at Hazel one more time, permission, and she nodded. He went with Holt without a backward glance, which was the exact right thing to do, which was the reason she had always been glad he existed. She went to find a horse. The cattle drive left Sweetwater Flats at 8:30 in the morning. 280 head of longhorn, moving west through a cold October sky, flanked by 11 cowboys and one trail boss, who had just paid $400 for a woman he had never met, and was now riding slightly ahead of her in a silence that said he was already regretting either nothing or everything. Hazel rode a bay mare named Fern. The mare was steady and patient and asked nothing of her rider except basic courtesy, which suited the current circumstances exactly. For the first mile, she simply watched the land. She had grown up in Sweetwater Flats. She knew every bend in the wash and every hill on the horizon. She had never once left. Looking back now, she could see the cottonwoods thinning, the roof lines dropping away, the familiar shape of the place she had spent her entire life. She felt nothing, not grief, not relief, just the particular emptiness of a door finally closing. She turned forward. Rafe Merritt rode 20 yards ahead, a dark shape against the pale sky. He hadn't spoken to her since the Red Eagle. He had helped her onto the mare with the brisk practicality of someone completing a task, and then he had ridden to the front of the herd, and he had not looked back. She had 20 questions, and she kept all of them. At mid-morning, the drive slowed for water at a creek crossing. The cattle spread out along the bank, pushing and jostling. The cowboys worked the flanks. Holt had Danny up in front of him on a spotted horse, pointing things out and explaining the mechanics of the drive in the patient, detailed way of someone who had waited a long time for an interested audience. Rafe dismounted and walked to the creek. He crouched at the water's edge and filled his canteen. He did not look around. He was not performing indifference. He simply did not feel the need to explain himself to the landscape. Hazel tied Fern and walked down to the bank 20 yards from him. She crouched and cupped water in her hands and drank. The cold of it ached against her teeth. "You didn't shake Crane's hand?" she said. Rafe glanced at her. He had gray eyes. She had noticed that in the storeroom. Not dark gray, not light, but the particular gray of clouds before rain when the light is still in them. "No," he said. "He noticed. I'm sure he did. He'll send someone after you, after the money maybe, or after me." She paused. "You knew that." "Yes, and you did it anyway." Rafe looked at the water. "I've had men sent after me before." "That's not an answer." He was quiet for a moment. Not evasive, just the silence of someone who says things once and means them to count. "I told you why," he said. "Someone you couldn't save." "Yes? A woman. My wife." His voice didn't break. It was simply stated the way men state things they have learned to live alongside. "Her name was Beth. She died 3 years ago. There was a man who—" He stopped, started again. "There was a man who had what you might call an arrangement with her that she didn't choose. I found out too late. I killed the man." He looked at her steadily. "So now I'm a wanted man running cattle to California, which is the shape my life has taken." Hazel held his gaze. "Wanted for what?" "Murder. Judge Whitmore, Cimarron County, 18 months ago." The name went through her like the cold creek water, fast and deep, and reaching somewhere it shouldn't have. She did not let it show on her face. "The law's following you," she said. Marshal Elias Reed, he's been behind me 4 months, patient man. And you're taking Danny and me onto a drive that has a marshal following it. The crossroads is 3 days east. I said I'd get you there. He stood up. After that, I'll understand if you want to find another road. He walked back to his horse. Hazel crouched at the creek a moment longer, the water cold against her fingers. Whitmore. She reached into her boot and touched the edge of the locket, felt the small, hard oval of it against her fingertip. She had grown up not knowing her real name. Gerald had taken her in as a favor. That was what he always said, took you in as a favor to someone who was owed. He had never explained more than that. She had stopped asking by the time she was 12. But there had been a name. One name spoken once when Gerald was drunk enough not to remember saying it in the morning. Whitmore. She had filed it away in the part of her mind where she kept things that needed waiting for. Rafe Merritt had killed a man named Judge Whitmore. She stood up slowly. She walked back to the mare and mounted without assistance and rode to the back of the herd where she could think without anyone watching her face. She needed to know more before she said anything. She needed to understand what she was holding. It was possible it was nothing. Whitmore was not an uncommon name. It was possible it was something that would break open the ground under both of them. She rode in silence and kept her face toward the horizon. By afternoon, the drive had settled into a rhythm. The cattle moved with resigned cooperation. The cowboys called back and forth in the coded shorthand of men who had worked together long enough. Danny had relocated from Holt's horse to a position 3 feet behind Rafe, from which he asked a steady stream of questions with the systematic thoroughness of a boy conducting research. How many of these cows are yours? None. They belong to a man in El Paso. Do you like cows? They serve their purpose. What's their purpose? Feeding people, making money, providing an occupation for men who don't fit well anywhere else. Are you a man who doesn't fit well anywhere else? A pause. Yes, Rafe said. Danny considered this. My sister doesn't fit well anywhere either. Is that so? She's better than most places she's been put. Danny seemed to feel this was a factual statement rather than a compliment. She just hasn't found the right place yet. Rafe said nothing. But Hazel, riding 30 yards back, saw his shoulders shift a small movement, barely perceptible, like something settling or something loosening, she couldn't tell which. That evening, they made camp along a dry arroyo. The cook fire built up quick and bright in the cold air. The cowboys ate and played cards and argued about nothing with the contentment of men who had reduced life to its essentials. Holt produced a second bedroll from somewhere and set up a space for Hazel and Danny near the chuck wagon, private, sheltered by the wagon's bulk, far enough from the men to be respectful. It ain't much, Holt said. It's more than I had last night, Hazel said. Holt looked at her steadily. He had that quality of the best old men. He didn't perform wisdom. He just had it the way certain rocks have warmth they collected from the day's sun. He's a good man, Holt said. I know he don't look it. You told me something like that this morning. Worth repeating. Holt twisted the brim of his hat. 3 years I've ridden with him. I've seen him do hard things. I've seen him do kind things. He don't separate them as much as you might expect. He killed a man. He did. You think that was a kind thing? Holt was quiet for a moment. I think it was a broken thing. I think there's a difference. He looked toward the fire where Rafe sat alone at the edge of the light, not eating, not sleeping, not quite present in the way a man isn't present when something is eating him alive from the inside. He's been punishing himself ever since, trying to die quietly hasn't managed it. Hazel followed his gaze. Why are you telling me this? Because you're looking at him the way people look at something they haven't decided about yet, Holt said. And I figure someone ought to give you accurate information to work with. He tipped his hat and walked away. Hazel stood at the edge of the firelight for a long while. Danny had fallen asleep in the bedroll with the abrupt completeness of childhood, one arm thrown out, his face perfectly peaceful. She pulled the blanket up and tucked it around his shoulder. Then she sat beside him in the dark, took the locket out of her boot and held it in both hands. For my girl, whenever she's ready. She had never known the woman who wrote that. She had built a life inside the absence of her, worked around it, like water works around a stone, finding a path that acknowledged the obstacle without being stopped by it. But she had a name now, or the edge of one. She thought about what Holt had said, a broken thing. She thought about the way Rafe had looked at her through the door of the storeroom, not with hunger, not with pity, but with that flat recognition, like someone looking in a mirror they weren't expecting. She opened the locket and looked at the photograph. Dark hair, quiet eyes. A woman who had written a message to a daughter she was giving away because whatever circumstances had brought her to that point She had wanted the girl to know she was held in mind. Hazel closed the locket. She thought about Gerald, about the night she was 12 sick with fever, and she had woken at 3 in the morning to find him sitting in the chair beside her bed with his big hands clasped together and his face open in a way it never was during the day. She had never told him she'd seen that. She had never given him the satisfaction. She didn't know if she had been right to withhold it or wrong. She wasn't sure there was a word for what she'd done. It was just what you did when you grew up, learning that the people who were supposed to love you were working from a damaged map. Somewhere across the camp, Rafe Merritt sat alone at the edge of the firelight. The coyotes called. The cattle shifted inside. The stars were very bright and very cold. Hazel put the locket back in her boot, lay down beside her brother, and closed her eyes. She was not safe. She was not free. She did not entirely trust the man who had bought her way out of a locked room. But she was moving for the first time in her life in a direction she had chosen. That was enough. For tonight, that was enough. The drive moved west for 3 days before the trouble showed its face. Not Crane's trouble that came later. This was quieter. The kind of trouble that lives in a camp and doesn't announce itself until the air has had time to thicken with it. On the second morning, a cowboy named Seb stopped his horse in front of Hazel's mare and blocked the trail. He was young, 22, maybe 23, with a handsome face he knew about, and a smile that worked best when no one was looking directly at it. "Ma'am," he said, not disrespectfully, just with the particular weight of a word that means something other than what it says. "Move your horse," Hazel said, just being sociable. His eyes moved over her once quick and practiced the way men look when they think no one will notice. "You ain't exactly told us your story. The boys are curious." "The boys don't need to know my story. Merritt paid $400 for you." His tone was light, conversational. "That kind of money buys curiosity." "That kind of money bought a woman's freedom," Hazel said. "Not an explanation. Move your horse." A beat. He held the position 1 second longer than was comfortable just to make a point about points. Then he moved. She rode forward without looking back. That evening, Rafe appeared at the edge of the cook fire while she was helping Holt with supper. He didn't sit. He stood with his arms folded and looked across the camp toward where Seb was playing cards with 2 other hands. "He bothered you today," Rafe said. It wasn't a question. She didn't know how he knew. She hadn't said anything. "He blocked the trail for 30 seconds, she said. "I handled it." "I know you did." "Then why bring it up?" "Because I want to know if it happens again." He looked at her. "Not because you can't handle yourself. Because my outfit has a standard, and Seb is about to find out what it is." Hazel set down the spoon she was holding. "What's the standard?" "People in my camp are treated like people." He said it simply without editorial. Regardless of how they came to be here or what someone paid for their company. That's the standard. She looked at him for a long moment. "And if I handle it myself, then I stay out of it." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the shape a smile might make before it decided not to be one. "I got the impression you prefer that." "I do." He nodded. He picked up his coffee cup and went back to the perimeter of the camp where he spent the better part of every evening walking the edges of the firelight like a man patrolling the borders of his own thoughts. On the third day they found Rosa, or Rosa found them, which was more accurate. She appeared on the south side of the trail just after noon, a young woman walking in the wrong direction for someone with nowhere to be carrying a single bag and wearing a red dress that was not built for 30 miles of desert road. She was small, dark-haired, with a face that had learned to give away nothing and eyes that were giving away everything. She stopped when the cattle drive came into view. She didn't run. Holt rode out to her. There was a conversation. He rode back. "Girl from the Red Eagle," he told Rafe. "Name's Rosa Delgado. Says she walked out last night. She's got nowhere to go." Rafe looked at the woman standing in the road. She stood very straight with the careful dignity of someone who had learned that dignity was the one thing that couldn't be taken unless you gave it. "She can ride with us to the crossroads," Rafe said. "Same as Miss Ashfield." "Same as Miss Ashfield." When Rosa climbed up behind Holt's horse and the drive moved on, Hazel fell back to ride beside her. Rosa looked at her sideways without turning her head. "You're the one from the storeroom," Rosa said. "Yes. Luther told Crane you were gone before dawn." "Crane wasn't angry." She paused. "That's the part that scared me. He was just quiet. Crane angry is loud and quick. Crane quiet means he's planning something that takes longer." Hazel absorbed this. "Did he send anyone after the drive?" "Not yet. He'll wait to see where you land." Rosa's voice was matter-of-fact, the tone of someone who had mapped the terrain of her circumstances thoroughly. "He doesn't waste resources on long-distance problems. He waits until the problem comes close enough." And are you a problem he'll come looking for? Rosa was quiet for a moment. I have something of his, she said. Documents, letters, things he wrote to men he shouldn't have been writing to. She looked straight ahead. I didn't take them to cause trouble. I took them because I didn't know what else to carry. Hazel said nothing. She filed it. Was the first time in 3 days. That was the first time in 3 days that Hazel had sat with another woman, and she felt the simple physical relief of it, the particular easing that comes from being understood without having to explain yourself. How long were you at the Red Eagle? Hazel asked. 2 years. Rosa said it without shame and without apology. I came from Santa Fe. I was 17 and stupid, and I believed a man who told me there was good work in Sweetwater Flats. There wasn't. There was work, Rosa said carefully. It just wasn't good. She wrapped her arms around her knees. She had changed out of the red dress Holt had produced a spare shirt and trousers from somewhere, which Rosa wore with the matter-of-fact adaptability of someone accustomed to making do with what was offered. I can read and write, Rosa said. Crane found that out early. He had me keeping records for him, inventory correspondence accounts. She looked at the fire. You learn a lot keeping records for a man like that. What did you learn? That Crane and Whitmore were partners for 15 years. She said it quietly, watching the fire. That together they ran every land swindle and labor scheme in 3 counties. And that when Whitmore died, Crane was very careful to make sure the records pointed somewhere else. Hazel felt the ground shift slightly under her. Whitmore, she said. The judge, shot 18 months ago in Cimarron County. Rosa looked at her. You've heard of him. I've heard the name. Crane was furious when Merritt killed him. Not because he cared about Whitmore, he did not really. Because Whitmore dead meant certain arrangements became difficult. Witnesses who'd been managed started talking. Rosa paused. Crane spent 6 months trying to find Merritt. Then he let it go. Said the marshal would handle it eventually. Hazel sat with all of this. Rosa, she said carefully, these documents, what exactly are they? Rosa looked at her for a long moment. The fire crackled between them. Somewhere in the dark, a nighthawk called. They're enough, Rosa said to end Crane, completely and permanently. She reached inside her shirt and produced a small oilskin packet tied with cord. She held it without offering it. I've been waiting for the right moment, the right person. You've been waiting 2 years. For 2 years, I had nowhere to go. Her voice was simple, unhurried. Now I have somewhere to go. Hazel looked at the packet. She thought about what it meant, what it could mean if it was what Rosa said it was. A lever, a key, something with the weight of truth in it. She thought about Rafe. She thought about the name Whitmore living in her locket, in Gerald's drunk confession, in this packet of documents, in the gray eyes of the man who rode ahead of the herd every day, like a man trying to outrun something he'd done. There were too many threads. She needed to pull one before she could see the pattern. Tell me, she said, everything you know about the judge, Rosa told her. It took most of the night. The fire burned to coals. Danny slept on. The cattle shifted and sighed. And Rosa's voice moved through the dark, steady and detailed, the voice of a woman who had been listening very carefully for 2 years. Hazel did not sleep that night. She lay beside Danny in the dark and stared at the cold sky and turned everything over in her mind, the way you turn a stone you found and are not sure yet whether it is valuable or simply heavy. In the morning, she rose before dawn and walked to the creek. Rafe was already there. He stood at the water's edge with his coffee cup looking at the far bank. He didn't turn when she approached, but he stopped looking quite so far away. You didn't sleep, he said. Neither did you. I haven't slept well in 3 years. He said it without seeking sympathy, just a fact. What kept you up? She crouched at the water's edge. The creek moved slow and cold under the early sky. What do you know about Whitmore? She asked. A pause. She felt rather than saw the change in him a subtle bracing, like a man adjusting his footing on uncertain ground. He was a federal judge in Cimarron County, Rafe said. He ran a scheme for 15 years buying land at forced sale prices, coercing people into debt they couldn't pay, then collecting. He had the law in his pocket. He was careful. When my wife, he stopped, started again. When Beth died, I went to the county seat for justice. I was told there was no case. I was told to go home. So you went back and shot him? Yes. 2 weeks before a lawyer from Santa Fe arrived with documented evidence that could have convicted him in a courtroom. The silence that followed was the kind that cost something. She looked up at him. His face had gone still in the way faces go still when you've said the thing a person has been carrying for a long time. How do you know that? He said. Rosa, the girl from the saloon. He said it quietly like a man putting something together. She worked for Crane. She kept records for Crane. Crane and Whitmore were partners. Hazel stood. She has documents, Rafe. Letters, proof of everything they did together, the land fraud, the coercion, the men who died in the machinery of it, everything. He was quiet for a long time. She let him be. Some silences needed room. If I had waited 2 more weeks, he said finally. Yes. He looked at the creek. Something moved across his face, grief. Or its older, uglier twin, the grief you feel about your own actions rather than what was done to you. The man I killed, he said slowly, he deserved to die. I still believe that. But I could have had justice instead of vengeance. And I chose vengeance because I couldn't, because I was... You were a man who had just lost the only person who mattered to him, Hazel said. You were not thinking clearly. That's not an excuse. No, it's an explanation. There's a difference. She paused. I'm not telling you this to make you feel better. I'm telling you because it matters to what comes next. He looked at her. What comes next? There's a crossroads 3 days east. She kept her voice even. Marshall Reed is following you. You said you have 2 choices: run to California or go back and face a trial that's stacked against you. She looked at him steadily. Rose's documents are a third option. Evidence that Whitmore and Crane built a criminal operation that killed people and corrupted the law. Your killing of Whitmore looks different inside that context. Or I hang faster. Or you get a pardon. She held his gaze. I don't know which, but I know that running to California means living the rest of your life as a ghost. And I know, she stopped. What? She looked at him. She had not told him about the locket. She had not told him about the name Whitmore living in her boot for 16 years, or the photograph of a woman she had never met, or the drunk confession of a man who had sold her for the cost of his debt. She did not know yet what those threads meant when you followed them to their ends. But she knew that she was standing at a crossroads of her own, that the easy thing, the survivable thing, was to take Danny to the crossroads town and find her own road and let Rafe Merritt carry his ghosts alone. She had spent 20 years doing this survivable thing. I know that some problems don't get smaller when you run from them, she said. They just get farther behind you until the day they're not. He looked at her for a long moment. Why do you care, he said, not unkindly, genuinely. She didn't answer right away. The creek moved between them and the early light came down cold and clear. I'm not sure yet, she said finally. It was honest. But I'll tell you when I am. She walked back to camp. 3 things happened on the 4th day. The first was that Danny discovered that the spotted horse Holt rode a mare named Cinnamon with a patient temperament and a personality like a steadily burning fire would follow him around like a moth if he stood still long enough. He spent the better part of the morning standing very still near Cinnamon's head, offering grass, having a conversation with her that Hazel could not quite hear from 30 yards away. Rafe rode past this scene at mid-morning. He slowed his horse. Danny looked up. She likes me, he said. She does, Rafe agreed. How do you know you just got here? She's not trying to bite you. Danny considered this. Is that the bar? Something crossed Rafe's face, then swift and unguarded, gone almost before it registered. It was the expression of a man who has heard something that reminds him of someone. Not in a painful way. In the way you are reminded of music you loved and had almost forgotten. He rode on. But that night when the camp had settled and Danny was asking his evening questions, a ritual he had apparently established without discussing it with anyone, Rafe answered them with a patience that was not performed. He answered the way a man answers when he has been given something back he thought was gone and is being careful with it. What happens to the cattle after California? They get sold, become beef. Does that bother you? Does it bother you when you eat beef? Or no, then we're both managed. Danny thought about this for a minute. Are you going to California with them? That's the plan. What happens after? I don't know. You don't plan that far. I've been having trouble planning more than a few days ahead. My sister says that's what happens when you're stuck. Danny looked up at him. She says when you can't think past the next thing, it means you haven't decided whether you want to. Rafe was quiet for a moment. Your sister says that. She says a lot of the things. She thinks I'm not listening. Danny scratched Cinnamon's nose. I always listen. The second thing that happened on the 4th day was that Rosa began quietly and without fanfare to sort her documents. She sat in the wagon bed during the afternoon rest, the oilskin packet open in her lap, going through papers, with the systematic attention of someone who had been waiting to do this for a long time. She made 2 piles. She did not explain what the piles meant, and Hazel did not ask. What Hazel noticed was this: Rosa handled the papers the way you handle things you have risked everything to keep. With both hands, with care, with the particular kind of attention that says this matters, this is real, this is the proof that what happened was real and that I was there and that I survived it. That evening, Rosa came to Hazel with the smaller of the two piles. "This is yours," she said. Hazel looked down at the papers. Letters mostly. A ledger page. At the bottom, a document with a seal she recognized from court papers she had seen Gerald receive: official territorial, the kind of thing that cost money to produce. She looked at Rosa. "Read the bottom one first," Rosa said. Hazel sat down. She unfolded the document carefully. It was dated 1859, 20 years ago. It was a record of a private arrangement between one Cornelius Whitmore, attorney at law, and one Gerald Ashfield, laborer of Santa Fe, New Mexico territory. In the language of the law, which she read slowly, it described the terms of a guardianship. A child, female, 4 years old, to be placed with Gerald Ashfield in exchange for the cancellation of a debt and a monthly payment to be made for 10 years. The child's name was listed as Hazel Frances Whitmore. She read it twice. The name sat in her chest like a stone dropped in still water, the impact first, then the ring spreading outward. Hazel Frances Whitmore. She was the daughter of Cornelius Whitmore, the judge. The man Rafe had shot 18 months ago on the floor of his own office. The man who had owned half of 3 counties through corruption and violence and careful forgetting. She was also the daughter of a woman whose name was written on the next document, a woman named Clara Reyes, who had been a school teacher in Santa Fe, who had loved a man who did not love her back enough to do anything that cost him something, who had given her daughter away to Gerald Ashfield because she had no money and no family and no other road. Clara Reyes, who had tucked a locket into the hem of a child's dress and written for my girl whenever she's ready. Hazel sat very still for a long time. Rosa sat beside her. She did not speak. She was the kind of person who understood the difference between company and intrusion. The fire crackled. The cattle breathed. Danny slept. After a while, Hazel said, "He didn't know about me. Whitmore, he sent Gerald money for 10 years. He set up the arrangement. But I don't think she stopped, started again. I don't think he thought of it as a child. I think he thought of it as a problem that money could solve." "Probably," Rosa said. "And Gerald thought of it as an obligation." She looked at the document, the careful legal language, the monthly payment, the cancellation of debt. "He took me in because he owed money, but she thought of the chair, the 3 in the morning, the man who looked afraid. "He didn't keep me just because of the money." "No," Rosa said. "That doesn't make what he did all right." "No, it just means it's—" She searched for the word. "Complicated. Most things are." Hazel looked at the fire. She thought about Rafe, who had killed a man she was genetically descended from, who was carrying his guilt like a stone in his chest, who had paid $400 for a woman he had never met because he couldn't save the one who mattered. She thought about how to tell him. She thought about whether to tell him. She thought about what the telling would cost out and what the silence would cost, and which was a price she could live with. The third thing that happened on the 4th day was that Marshal Elias Reed appeared on the ridge to the north. Holt spotted him, first a single rider still as a feature of the landscape, watching from 200 yards up. He came to Rafe without urgency. "Read it," Holt said. Rafe looked up at the ridge. He was quiet for a moment. "How long has he been there?" "Hour, maybe." Didn't approach. "He won't, not yet." Rafe watched the distant rider. "He's patient, Reed is. He learned from Whitmore's system. Wait until the other side makes a mistake, then move." "You going to make a mistake?" "I've already made all my mistakes." Rafe's voice was dry. "Running out of new ones." "Then what's he waiting for?" "I don't know." He looked at the ridge a moment longer. "But I think he might be waiting to see what I do next." He rode back to the herd. That night, Hazel found him at the perimeter doing his nightly circuit. She fell into step beside him. They walked for a while without speaking, which had become in 4 days a thing they did. "Reed is on the ridge," she said. "I know. He didn't approach." "No. Does that strike you as odd?" He considered this. "Reed's a by-the-book man. Was anyway before Whitmore turned him into a hunting dog." He glanced at her. "You know things about Whitmore you haven't told me." It was not a question. She had expected it. She had told him enough this morning that the outline of the rest was visible. "Yes," she said. He stopped walking. She stopped too and turned to face him. The night was cold and very still. The fire was a small orange point behind them. "Tell me," he said. So she did. She told him about the document, about the name Hazel Frances Whitmore in careful legal script, about Clara Reyes and the locket and the handwriting that said, "For my girl whenever she's ready." She told him about the monthly payments and the debt, and Gerald, who had been paid to take her and had in some broken and insufficient way wanted her anyway. She watched his face as she spoke. It was like watching weather move across a plain. The things he felt were visible and swift, and he did not try to hide them. When she finished, he said nothing for a long time. "You're his daughter," Rafe said at last, not accusing, working it out. "By biology, not by anything that mattered. I killed him." "Yes." "Does that," he stopped, "change how I feel about it?" She looked at him steadily. "You killed a man who paid money to make sure I would never find him, who spent my entire life being the reason I existed and doing absolutely nothing about it." She paused. "He also destroyed families and corrupted the law and was responsible for your wife's death. The fact that I share his blood doesn't change any of that. It changes something." His voice was rough. "It changes the story. It doesn't change the facts." He looked at her. The firelight was behind her, and she could not see his expression clearly, but she could see his hands open at his sides, not fisted, not braced. "Hazel," he said, and then stopped as if the name was already more than he'd intended. She waited. "I need to tell you something," he said. "I've known since the fourth day." She felt her breath shift. Holt recognized the name. "Yes," he looked away. "I didn't know what to do with it. I still don't. I thought about telling you. I thought about—" He stopped again. "I didn't know if it would—" "You thought I'd hold it against you," she said. "I thought you had every right to." She looked at him, this man who had paid $400 for her freedom and ridden beside her in silence for 4 days, carrying a secret that could have burned everything down between them. "Rafe," her voice was careful, "I grew up in a house with a man who made every wrong choice out of fear. Fear of losing me, fear of me finding out the truth, fear of his own inadequacy." She paused. "The worst damage he did was the damage he did while afraid. If you are afraid, tell me. But if you're keeping quiet to protect me—" She held his gaze. "Don't. I would rather have the hard truth than the protected version." He looked at her for a long time. "I kept quiet," he said, "because I didn't know how to say I might have ended the last family you had, and I am very sorry, and I don't know what that means for what—" He stopped, pressed his lips together. "For what I think is happening between us." The silence settled around them like the cold. "What do you think is happening between us?" she said. He looked at her. In the pale light, his gray eyes were steady and serious and entirely without pretense. "Something I don't have the right to," he said. She held his gaze for one moment longer. Then she turned and walked back toward the fire. She didn't sleep. But when she lay in the dark beside Danny, listening to his steady breathing, she held the locket in her hand and thought about the woman who had left it. Clara Reyes, the school teacher who had loved wrong and paid for it, and still found enough grace to write for my girl whenever she's ready. She thought about what it meant to be ready. She thought about a man standing in the dark with open hands saying something I don't have the right to. She thought about how most people spent their lives waiting to be given permission. She pressed her lips together. Not yet, but she was beginning to understand the shape of the thing. The crossroads came on the 7th day. It was not a dramatic landmark, just the place where the Western Trail met the road south to El Paso and the road northeast towards Cimarron County and farther on Santa Fe and Austin and the whole machinery of territorial law. A split rail marker weathered to gray with painted letters barely legible in the flat midday light. The cattle drive stopped. The cowboys looked at Rafe. Rafe looked at the crossroads. Nobody said anything for a minute. Then Holt said quietly, "What's it going to be, boss?" Rafe sat his horse and looked at the fork in the road for a long time. The wind came off the flats carrying dust and the smell of sage. Behind him, the herd was restless, pushing at the flanks. He turned his horse northeast. The cowboys looked at each other. "California's west," Seb said. "I know which direction California is," Rafe said. "Then, I'm going to Cimarron County." He said it without inflection, the way he said things he had already fully decided. "To face the charges." He looked at his men. "I'm not asking any of you to come. The drive goes on without me. Holt knows the road. El Paso buyer is named Calhoun. He'll have the money ready." He paused. "Any man who wants to keep drawing wages goes west with Holt." Silence. Then one by one his men turned their horses northeast. All of them, even Seb. Rafe stared at them. "This is a cattle drive," he said, "not a war party." "Funny," Holt said, "but looks like one from here." He wheeled Cinnamon around. "We signed on to ride with you, Merritt, not with a herd of cows. The cows can wait." Something moved across Rafe's face, brief, private, quickly contained. "The cattle, we'll be fine for a week. There's water at the Cimarron station and enough grass for 10 days. We drive them back to the Western Fork after." Holt looked at him steadily. Some things are worth the detour. Rafe looked at Hazel. She said nothing. She had said what she needed to say the night before. This part was his. He looked at the road northeast. All right, he said. They rode. Marshal Reed caught up with them on the second day northeast. He came in the morning alone, riding a compact bay that ate up miles without complaint. He was a compact man himself, 50s, square-faced, with the careful, deliberate movements of someone who had long since stopped making unnecessary gestures. He pulled up 50 yards out and called across the distance. Merritt. Rafe stopped the column. He rode forward alone. Hazel watched from behind Holt. The two men faced each other for a moment. Then Reed said something she couldn't hear. Rafe answered. Reed reached into his coat slowly without threat and produced a folded paper. He handed it to Rafe. Rafe read it. He read it again. He looked up at Reed. Reed said something else. Then Rafe turned his horse and rode back to the column. His face was unreadable. He stopped beside Hazel. The charges have been amended, he said. The territory is reopening the Whitmore case. New evidence. He held the paper. They want my testimony. In exchange for testimony, there's a possibility of pardon. Possibility. That's the word Reed used. He's a careful man. What does he want right now? He wants to escort us to Cimarron. Says he's not making an arrest. Rafe looked at the paper in his hand. Says he's been watching this drive for 2 weeks trying to decide something. What? Whether the man he's been chasing is the kind of man who deserves a chance. He looked up and something in his voice had shifted, not soft, but open like a door moved on its hinges. He says he thinks I am. Hazel looked at him. You believe him? Rafe was quiet. He looked at Reed, who sat his horse patiently 50 yards away, making no demands, not rushing, just waiting. I don't know. He folded the paper. But I'm going to find out. He rode back to Reed. Hazel watched them fall in together, the wanted man and the law man, who had been hunting him, riding side by side toward the northeast like men who had decided to stop being enemies and were trying to figure out what to be instead. She did not fully exhale until they were both still upright in their saddles. Gerald Ashfield arrived on the fourth day. He came from the south alone, on a mule that had seen better decades, looking like a man who had been riding hard for a long time and thinking harder. He spotted the column from the ridge and came down at a walk, his hat held in his hands. Hazel saw him from 100 yards away and felt nothing. Then she felt everything. She rode to meet him before anyone could stop her. He pulled up the mule and looked at her with the eyes of a man who has been rehearsing a conversation for a long time and has only just realized that no amount of rehearsal is adequate. Hazel, he said. Gerald? A pause. He turned his hat in his hands. I signed the papers, he said, Crane's papers. I know you heard. He looked at his hat. I signed them, and then I watched you leave through the window, and he stopped. I didn't stop you. I could have. I knew where you'd go. I let you go. You let Crane's men stop me first. Yes. He didn't look away. Whatever he wasn't a man who lied to her face. It was possibly the only clean thing left between them. I did. And then I watched that trail boss walk into Crane's office, and I watched him walk out with you, and you were glad, Hazel said, because someone else did what you couldn't. He flinched, but he nodded. I want to know something, she said, and I want the truth. All right. You knew what I was, who I was. She held his gaze. Whitmore's daughter, you've known my whole life. He said nothing. Did you take me because of the money? Gerald's hands tightened on the hat brim. He looked at her for a long moment. Whatever he was working through, he worked through it visibly, the way weathered men work through things without grace, without disguise. At first, he said, yes. At first it was the money, the debt. He offered to clear what I owed and pay me besides. He looked away. You were 4 years old. You had your mother's eyes. He stopped. You cried when we left Santa Fe. All night. And then you stopped. And in the morning you woke up and looked at me like you'd decided something and you said, I'm hungry. And he stopped again. And you kept me, Hazel said. I kept you. His voice was rough. Not because of the money. Not after the first month. He turned the hat again. I kept you because you were mine, the best decision I never meant to make. And then you sold me. Yes, because you were afraid I'd find out. He looked at her then fully without deflection, and she saw something in his face she had not seen there before. Not the love she had caught glimpses of through walls and at 3 a.m, but something beneath it. The bedrock of it. The part that wasn't gentle. Yes, he said. I was afraid. I've been afraid of you since the day you were old enough to ask questions I couldn't answer. He swallowed. I was afraid you'd find out and leave, so I You made sure I would, she said. The words landed between them. He took them. I know, he said. I know that. I've been writing 4 days knowing that. He looked at her hands, brown and capable and scarred from years of work in his housework he had let her do without ever once thinking of it as gratitude. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't deserve it, and I know I don't. He reached slowly into his coat and produced an envelope worn at the corners, the seal broken and resealed and broken again. I came to give you this. She looked at it. What is it? Your mother's letters. All of them. He held the envelope carefully the way a man holds something he knows he should have given away long ago. She wrote every year until you were 12. He closed his eyes briefly. I kept them. I told myself I'd give them when the right time came. He looked at her. The right time came and went about 15 years ago. Hazel took the envelope. She held it in both hands. She could feel the weight of it, the years of it, the woman in the photograph writing once a year to a daughter she had given away and never stopped thinking about. She thought about all the things she wanted to say to Gerald Ashfield. The list was long, and it started in anger and went through grief, and somewhere in the middle, in the part she rarely let herself visit, it went through the chair beside the sickbed and the hands clasped together and the fear on a face that was trying very hard not to be afraid. She thought about what Rosa had said about the documents, about carrying things because you don't know what else to carry. She thought about what it cost to have loved wrong for 20 years and to be standing in a road holding your hat trying to say so. I need time, she said. He nodded. I need time, and I need you to do something difficult. She looked at him. I need you to tell the truth about Crane, about Whitmore, about all of it. She paused. There are people in Cimarron County who can use what you know. It might help someone get free of a charge he's been carrying. She let that sit. Can you do that? He looked at her for a moment. Then slowly he nodded. I can do that, he said. Then ride with us. He blinked. You're asking me to... I'm not forgiving you today, she said clearly. I'm not asking you to be anything other than what you are. But you're Danny's father, and I am not going to take Danny's father away from him because I'm angry. She looked at him. You can ride with us. You can tell the truth when we get to Cimarron. And after that, she held his gaze. After that, you prove it. Gerald Ashfield stood in the road with his hat in his hands and his eyes very bright. And for a moment, he looked like the man she imagined he might have been once before the grief and the debt and the drinking had done their work on him. All right, he said. He tied the mule to the back of the column and rode with them. Danny, when he saw Gerald, stopped walking. Hazel watched her brother watch his father. There was a long moment in which she did not know what would happen. Danny was 8 years old. He was also a boy who had learned to read atmospheres before he could read words. Then Danny walked to the mule and put his hand on its neck. You rode a long way, Danny said to Gerald. Yes. Why? Gerald looked down at his son, his voice when he found it was quieter than Hazel had ever heard it. Because I owed it, he said. Danny looked at him for another moment. Then he said, Cinnamon can walk alongside the mule. She likes company. He brought Cinnamon up beside the mule and walked between them, one hand on each animal. Gerald Ashfield stared ahead at the road and did not speak for a long time. His eyes were very bright. Hazel looked at Rafe. He was watching Danny. He had the expression she had seen that morning with the spotted horse, the swift, unguarded thing that passed through him like light through water. But this time it didn't pass through. It stayed. She looked at him, looking at her brother, and she felt the shape of something settle into clarity. They reached Cimarron County on the 6th day. The county seat was a small, hard-edged town courthouse jail. 3 saloons, a church that looked like it had been built in a hurry and regretted it. People stopped and stared as the column came in. A cattle drive followed by a marshal, followed by a mule, ridden by a man holding his hat in his hands, was not a common sight. Marshal Reed rode ahead and made arrangements. By evening, there was a meeting in the courthouse. Rafe Reed, a territorial prosecutor named Whitfield, and 4 men who had ridden in from Santa Fe with documents and depositions and the careful professional wariness of lawyers who had been promised something they were not entirely sure would be delivered. Rosa sat in the back of the room with her oilskin packet. Hazel sat beside her. Danny sat beside Hazel. Gerald sat at the far end of the row, hat in his lap. The prosecutor read from Rosa's documents for 40 minutes. The room was very quiet. Outside, the town went about its evening, business boots on the boardwalk, a dog barking the piano at the nearest saloon beginning its nightly work. Then Gerald Ashfield stood up without being asked. The prosecutor looked at him. I have information about Crane and Whitmore, Gerald said. His voice was not steady, but it was present, which was what mattered. I've been part of what they built for 12 years. I'd like to give a full account. He looked at his hat. Whatever that costs me. The prosecutor looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "Sit down, Mr. Ashfield. We'll take your statement in the morning." The statement took 3 days. Rafe's testimony took 2. Hazel was not in the courtroom for most of it. She sat in the small room the marshal's office had cleared for them, bare walls, a window overlooking the street, a table with 2 chairs, and she read her mother's letters. Clara Reyes had written in a careful schoolteacher's hand. The letters were not sentimental. They were factual, detailed the letters of a woman who had accepted her circumstances without making peace with them. She described her work teaching in a small school south of Santa Fe. She described the students. She described the weather in the garden and the small, accretive details of a life being lived carefully. And in each letter at the end, a single paragraph about the daughter she had given away. "I hope you are growing tall. I hope someone is teaching you to read. I hope you are difficult when you need to be and tender when you can be, and that you never confuse those two things. I hope when you are ready, you find what I could not give you. I hope you know I gave you everything I had left when I had nothing left." 12 letters, one for every year until Hazel was 12 and then nothing. There was no letter explaining the silence. There was just the absence of the 13th. She sat with that for a long time. She thought about readiness, about what it meant to be ready, about the woman who had asked her daughter to wait for readiness without knowing whether the daughter would ever receive the question. She thought about all the waiting she had done in her life, waiting for Gerald to be different, waiting for a road out, waiting to understand what she was supposed to be, and she thought about how waiting was another word for being afraid to begin. On the 3rd day of Gerald's testimony, Ray found her in the small room. He sat down across from her. He looked tired, the particular tired of someone who has been telling a hard truth for hours and needs to stop moving for a while. "How is it going?" she asked. "I don't know yet." He leaned back in the chair. "The prosecutor is thorough. He's not friendly, but I don't need him to be friendly. I need him to be accurate." He looked at his hands. "I told them everything. About Beth, about the day I found out about Whitmore's system, about the lawyer who came too late." He paused. "I told them I killed a man who deserved to die in a courthouse, and instead I put him down on a floor, and that I've been carrying the shape of that difference ever since." "What did they say?" "Nothing. They wrote it down." He looked at her. "Your father gave them 12 years of account records, property transfers, names." He shook his head slightly. "He's been carrying those in his memory for 12 years. Everything Crane touched." "He's a very good bookkeeper when he's sober," Hazel said. Something crossed Rafe's face, not a smile, but warmer than his neutral expression. "He's also terrified. He's been terrified his whole life. It's the main thing wrong with him." Rafe was quiet for a moment. Rosa's documents combined with Gerald's testimony. He stopped. "They're calling it the most comprehensive account of territorial corruption since the Lincoln County business." He looked at the window. "The prosecutor said there'll be pardons, not just mine. Other men Whitmore's system convicted." "That's good. It doesn't undo what I did." "No, but it's what the doing was for." She held his gaze. "You were wrong about one thing. You said you chose vengeance over justice, but you were so angry when you did it that you didn't choose anything you acted." She paused. "The choice was whether to tell the truth afterward or whether to run until the truth caught up with you. And you chose to tell it." He looked at her. "You're being generous," he said. "I'm being accurate." She set down the letter she'd been holding. "There's a difference." He looked at the letter. He did not ask what it was. "Your mother," he said. "Yes." "What was she like?" Hazel thought about it. "Careful," she said finally. "She was very careful. With her words. With her expectations. She didn't ask for things she thought she couldn't have." She paused. "She asked me to be difficult when I needed to be." "Good advice. I've followed it." She looked at him. "She also asked me to be tender when I could be." A pause. "I haven't followed that one as well," she said. Rafe was quiet for a moment. He looked at the table between them. Then he looked at her. "Hazel." His voice was careful. The voice of a man who has been told once that words should only be said when they're meant. "I don't know what the verdict is going to be. I don't know if there's a pardon or a cell at the end of this week, but I want to tell you something before I find out, so that whatever happens, you know I said it when there was something to lose." She waited. "I came into a town looking for supplies," he said. And I found a woman in a locked room who looked at me like she was deciding whether I was worth the risk. He paused. I've been trying to be worth the risk since then. I don't know if I've managed it, but I want to keep trying. He looked at her steadily. I want to know what you decide about your mother's letters. I want to see Danny the first time he rides a horse by himself. He stopped, pressed his lips together. I want to find out what we are to each other when we're not running from something. The room was very quiet. Outside, a door opened and closed. Footsteps on the boardwalk. The ordinary sounds of a town going about its business, indifferent to the things being said in small rooms. Hazel looked at him. She thought about the woman in the photograph and the instructions she had lived by for 16 years. Whenever she's ready, she thought about the difference between waiting to be ready and deciding to begin. Rafe, she said, I grew up in a house where love was performed badly and with great damage. I don't have a clean model for how it's supposed to work. She held his gaze. What I know is that when I was locked in a room with no road out, I prayed for clarity, not rescue. Clarity. She paused. And then you opened the door. And you didn't pull me toward it. You stepped back and gave me room. He said nothing. That's not nothing, she said. He looked at her for a long time. Then slowly he nodded. It's not nothing, he agreed. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. She did not squeeze. She did not hold on. She just set her hand there on top of his warm and present and decided. He turned his hand over slowly and held hers. They sat like that for a while in the quiet room, while the town went about its business outside the window. It was not dramatic. It was not particularly romantic in the way people usually describe such things. It was simply the feeling of two people who had been alone for a long time deciding at the same moment to stop. The verdict came on the fifth day. The courthouse was full. Hazel and Danny sat in the front row. Holt sat behind them with most of the cowboys. Gerald sat in the back row again, hat in his lap, hands folded. Rosa sat at the end of Hazel's row. She had not spoken much since giving her testimony, but she was present in the way she was always present, attending, aware, understanding things before they were said. Rafe stood at the front of the room. The judge was 60 years old, white-haired, with the particular expression of a man who has seen the law used as both a weapon and a shield and is tired of both. He read for a long time. The room was very quiet. Unlawful, the context of said act reveals unlawful. The context of said act reveals a pattern of institutional failure so profound as to constitute significant mitigating circumstance. He set down the paper. Furthermore, the testimony and evidence provided by Mr. Merritt and corroborating witnesses has been instrumental in exposing a criminal network of considerable scope and harm. He looked at Rafe. On the basis of these findings, and in accordance with the governor's office, this court hereby grants a full and unconditional pardon. You are a free man, Mr. Merritt. The room erupted. Hazel did not make a sound. She sat very still with her hands in her lap and watched Rafe's face. She watched the moment hit him, watched him reach for the table, watched him close his eyes and then open them slowly as if testing whether the world was still there. Then Danny climbed over Hazel's knees and ran to the front of the room and grabbed Rafe's arm with both hands. Rafe looked down at the boy. Danny's face was absolutely illuminated. He had not been afraid because Hazel had not told him to be afraid. He had simply waited for the outcome with the trust of a child who has been told by someone reliable that things will be all right. You can stop running now, Danny said. Rafe knelt down. He put his hands on Danny's shoulders. Something in his face came apart very quietly in the way things come apart when they have been held together too long. Yeah, he said. His voice was rough. I reckon I can. He looked up over Danny's shoulder at Hazel. She looked back at him. She did not cry. She was not built for public crying, and she saw no reason to start now. But she felt standing in that loud, chaotic room a stillness in herself that she had not felt before. The stillness of something completed. A question finally answered. Outside afterward in the thin October light, the town was briefly extraordinary. All its ordinary surfaces lit from within by the peculiar grace of a good ending. Gerald found her on the courthouse steps. He stood below her, one step down, which put them almost at eye level. He had shaved. She hadn't noticed until now he had found a barber somewhere in the last 5 days, and the man underneath the beard was someone she had not quite seen before. He looked younger and also older. He looked more like himself. They've given me a deal, he said. Testimony for reduced charges, fines, community service of a kind. He looked at his hat. I'll be in Santa Fe for a year at least, maybe 2. Danny will want to write to you, she said. Gerald's face moved. I'll write back. Every time. Every time. She looked at him. She thought about the letters in the envelope, about her mother who had written 12 times into silence, about the difference between a man who runs from the people he loves and a man who stands in a road holding his hat trying to say so, about second chances, about whether they were earned or given. She was her mother's daughter, careful with her expectations, precise about what she would ask for. She was also 20 years old in a world that had spent most of her life trying to make her smaller, and she was done with small. She stepped down one step and put her arms around Gerald Ashfield. He went very still, the way a man goes still when he has been given something he cannot quite believe is real. Then his arms came up around her carefully, the way you hold something you have learned the hard way to be careful with. It was not forgiveness. She had told him that. Forgiveness was a road, not a moment, and she was at the beginning of it, not the end. But it was a beginning. She felt him exhale. "Don't waste it," she said into his shoulder. "I won't." His voice was barely sound. "I swear it." She stepped back. She looked at his face. The bright eyes, the worked-over expression of a man who is trying to figure out how to start over at 54. "Start with Danny," she said. He nodded. She walked down the rest of the steps. Rafe was waiting at the bottom, the hands in his coat pockets, watching the street. He had the look of a man who was testing the feel of freedom, like you test ice carefully, not entirely sure it will hold. "Where do you go now?" she asked. He looked at her. "Holt has a piece of land in Colorado," he said. "He's been trying to give it to me for 2 years. Clean water, good soil, room enough." He paused. "He says it needs work. Most good things do." "Yes." He looked at her. "I don't know how to build anything. I've been moving for so long, I don't know what staying looks like. I've been staying in the wrong place so long, I don't know what it feels like to be somewhere I chose." She held his gaze. "Maybe that evens out." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The shape a smile made before it decided it was ready. "Danny would need a horse," he said. "Danny would need several horses. He's going to want to ride all of them. And Rosa told me this morning she has family in Denver she's never met. She's going to find them." Hazel paused. "She said she's been carrying things long enough. It's time to put them down and pick up something new." Rafe was quiet for a moment. "Hazel," his voice was careful again, the once and mean it voice. "I said I wanted to find out what we are to each other when we're not running from something." "You did. We're not running anymore." She looked at him. He had gray eyes and a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in a week again, and hands that were open at his sides, and he was standing in the October light of a small town, looking at her the way you look at a road you have decided to take. "No," she said, "we're not." They left Cimarron County on a Thursday, a small party by the end, Rafe and Hazel and Danny. Holt, who had decided to go ahead to Colorado and get the stove going. 3 cowboys who had nothing better to do and were curious about the land. Gerald's mule, which Gerald had given to Danny with the solemn practicality of a man who was learning what good gifts look like. Rosa rode north with them for 2 days to the fork where the Denver road split off. She rode the spotted horse Holt had given her, Cinnamon, who had decided that Rosa was adequate company. At the fork, Rosa stopped. She looked north for a moment. Then she looked back at Hazel. "I've been waiting 2 years for the right moment," she said. "I think I've been confusing the right moment with the safe moment." "They're different things," Hazel said. "Very." Rosa looked at her. "You gave me the right moment. You gave yourself the right moment. You opened a door," Rosa said. "That's enough." She touched the brim of her hat. "Write to me when you're settled." "I will. Tell me what the land looks like." "I'll tell you everything." Rosa looked at Rafe. Something passed between them. The particular look of 2 people who have been on the same road and are now going in different directions and both understand that this is right. "Take care of them," she said. "I intend to," Rafe said. She turned her horse north and rode toward Denver without looking back. They watched her go. Then they turned their horses west toward the mountains, toward Colorado, toward the piece of land that needed work. Danny rode the mule. He had named it Gerald, which was either a compliment or the wry humor of an 8-year-old who paid very close attention. He rode between Rafe and Hazel, asking questions about what the land would look like, whether there would be snow, whether the horses would like it, whether Cinnamon counted as their horse now or Holt's horse. Rafe answered each question with the patient completeness of someone who has decided that small questions deserve full answers. Hazel listened. She held the locket in her left hand and let the miles pass and let herself slowly and deliberately stop waiting for the other shoe to fall. On the 3rd day they came over a rise and Colorado spread out before them, grass still green at the end of the season, mountains to the west with their first snow, a sky so clear it seemed to go on without end. Danny stopped the mule. He sat there for a moment looking at it. It's big, he said finally. It is, Rafe agreed. Is that ours? That piece there by the water? Yes. Danny looked at it for another long moment. Then he said in the matter-of-fact tone of a child who has arrived at a conclusion, "Good, I was tired of Sweetwater Flats." He rode on down the hill. Rafe looked at Hazel. She looked back at him. "Welcome home," she said. It came out softer than she'd intended. She didn't take it back. He looked at the land. He looked at Danny, who had already reached the bottom of the hill and was explaining something to the mule. He looked at Hazel with the gray eyes that were not dark gray or light gray, but the color of clouds when the light is still in them. "I haven't had one of those in a while," he said. "Neither have I." He reached across the distance between their horses and held out his hand. She looked at it. Then she took it. They rode down the hill together into the land that needed work into the future, that was uncertain and difficult and entirely possible into the life they had not planned and were going to build anyway, the way you build anything worth building. Not because you know what it will look like at the end, but because you decide the beginning is worth the effort. Behind them, the horizon held the last light of the afternoon, gold and thin and going. Ahead, the mountains. Ahead, the work. Ahead, everything.